Hello and welcome to The Information, where you'll get all the information on the latest in electronic, indie pop, experimental music, and more. Today we have the first of two videos compiling my favorites of last year, 2018. In this video in particular, I'll be talking about and counting down my top 10 favorite albums of 2018. Just as a music critic and a music reviewer, and just a music fan in general, I feel like just because of the subjective nature of music in general, it's, I think, a lot easier and a lot more fair to say that these were my favorites of last year. Obviously my best of, that kind of makes it sound more concrete and there's not really much room for discussion. Whereas, favorites, obviously you can say that this was my favorite and someone else can say, well, this was my favorite. So I'm going to go ahead and say that these were my favorite 10 albums of 2018. Kicking things off at number 10 is the Kero Bonito record, Time and Place. For me, this was a pretty surprising and pleasant record for the UK three-piece, who previous to this record were mostly considered a synth-pop and electronic group. Just before the release of this record, they had signed to American label Polyvinyl Records, who's home to American Football, Always, and a couple other indie rock and indie pop bands. So if the singles themselves didn't convince you, this was definitely the big step that lets you know that Kero Bonito are playing real instruments this time. And for what could have been a pretty disastrous end result, they successfully transitioned into a real rock band quite seamlessly, I feel. They've ditched pretty much entirely all the synthesizers, all the chintzy sounding Casio beats, and they've replaced them with actual guitars, actual live drumming, actual bass. The main thing that still stayed the same though is the vocals offered by lead vocalist and singer Sarah Perry. However, one interesting change to her lyrics is that her typically perennially sunny lyrics, they've been muted considerably here, and that's thanks in part to a series of personal crises I guess she has been through in the past couple of years leading up to this album. She lost a pet bird, she went through a couple bouts of sicknesses, I think a few other things I'm probably missing. However, the darker lyrical content creates a larger contrast here because the vocal melodies themselves are still rather bright and explorative. It makes for a more multi-dimensional listening experience. For instance, some tracks like the breezy album highlight Swimming, they equate a day at the beach with growing up and learning to do things on your own, while others like Fly rock with a shoegazy energy inspired by the death of Sarah's parakeet and wishing she could fly away with it. Also, the band's incorporation of sound effects tying in with the theme of the song they're singing about are here as well. For instance, the alarm clock-esque chimes of lead single Make Believe also mirrored the intro lyrics here where Sarah sings she sets her watch for 5 o'clock. And it's on this song, like many others on the record, where again the electronic elements are very subdued and they take more of a back seat and instead kind of tastefully accent a lot of the tracks instead, which is a nice touch. In general, of course, for the previously mentioned reasons, the songwriting takes a much more mature angle than any of their previous releases. And while I don't know if this is a permanent change or if this is just something they're kind of doing to switch things up, I feel like their switch to a more traditional rock band sound fits them now just as well as when they were a bilingual synth-pop outfit. So that's why Kero Bonito's Time and Place is my number 10 record of the year. My 9th favorite record of the year is the Against All Logic record, Against All Logic 2012 to 2017. Now, despite being quietly dropped in February of last year, this record quickly gained a lot of traction and just through word of mouth pretty much, thanks in part to the widespread rumor going around that this was a Nicholas Jar side project recorded under an alias. I think the rumors also spread pretty quickly just in part because it's a really great house and dance record. There is tons of top-notch sampling and sound design here, especially in the way that Nicholas puts his own spin on each sample. For instance, I love the lightning strikes and staticky crackles of the intro song This Old House Is All I Have, as is the smooth and somewhat hypnotic repetition in the dance track Such a Bad Way. For me, it's pretty easy to see that each song has its own kind of standout signature moment or sound in it, but to me none of them truly hold up to the gargantuan nearly 10-minute electronic opus Rave On You, which I will definitely be talking about in my favorite songs of 2018 coming very soon. With its melancholic Aphex Twin inspired chords, the bright synths, the clacking cowbell, and the overbearing bass line, I love the melodic inventiveness, and it really just, all of these things keep it from getting stale even 6 and 7 minutes in. So that's my number 9 favorite record of the year. We're down to number 8 now, and this is the new Parquet Quartz record, Wide Awake. This was certainly the most cerebral record, let alone the most cerebral rock record I've heard all year. You've got an album full of whip-smart lyrics, dry wit, and in-your-face, really aggressive calls to action across this record. Album opener and early highlight, Total Football, is easily the band's best tune from front to back. It's filled to the brim with intelligent messages that almost read like a manifesto of sorts against oppression and those that are like anti-union and look down upon protesters. Generally people that want to see the status quo stay the same. Also bonus points for having lead singer Andrew Savage scream "fuck Tom Brady" at the top of his lungs towards the very end of the track. I know he doesn't mean it in the purely sports-driven sense that I wish he did, and I understand why he said it. It's still a cathartic moment for me and anybody like me that hates the Patriots. Another early album highlight is the song "Violence," which, as you can probably assume, calls out violence itself and how it's inherent in our current capitalist and imperialist systems. And it's basically Andrew Savage calling for how it should be dismantled and how we need to prevent ourselves from being immune to it, even though we constantly see it in our news feeds and Facebook profiles and stuff. Also worth noting here is the unbearably tense dance punk track "Almost Had to Start a Fight." It burbles with energy and finally lets it out after a fantastic transition into the song's second half, "In and Out of Patience." Also, the undeniable groove that is the title track is something that needs to be talked about as well here. Sure, the tune itself melodically can get a little bit repetitive. It doesn't do a whole lot to change things up or stay fresh, even in its 2.5 minute runtime, but the lyrics do stay as sharp as a blade, pun very much intended. And the Talking Heads influence here should please any fan whose favorite song off their last record, Human Performance, was "One Man No City." The reason that this record isn't higher on the list for me is that I feel in terms of catchiness and just in general the musicality of the record, the latter half of the record does slip and sag a little bit, but with that being said, by no means is this a record that you should pass up, especially if you're a fan of smartly written and well-performed rock music. My number 7 album of the year is Porches with The House. This is definitely a record that grew on me somewhat since my initial review of it back in February, and I feel like even though despite a few lukewarm tracks on the back end and some just generally ineffective and extraneous filler interludes, I feel like this sophomore record from Porches is still a pretty engaging excursion into the genres of synthpop and indie pop. At its best, it is a well-produced breakup record that speaks to the many ways communication can break down and how singer and producer Aaron Maine copes with the fallout on songs like the blood orange-backed ballad "Country" or via the evocative strings of "By My Side." Other highlights for me include the 80s and Phoenix-esque pop gem that is "Now the Water" and the melancholy chords and metallic clanging percussion of "With Longing." If you liked what Aaron Maine was doing on his Domino Records debut Pool, you're definitely still going to find something you like here. A lot of it is kind of the same. He doesn't really do a whole lot as far as maturing his sound or maturing his lyrics in any significant way. But like I said, if you enjoyed Pool, which was definitely one of my favorite records of the year when it dropped, this was definitely just as enjoyable, if not more so, in spots. Up next at number 6, we have Steve Hauschildt with his record Dissolvi. Simply put, this is a solid ambient techno release from cranky stalwart Steve Hauschildt, who is making his ghostly international debut on this record here. Much like fellow ambient artist Heathered Pearls before him, speaking of ghostly international, the addition of beats to Steve Hauschildt's music not only greatly fleshes out his songs, but Steve goes the extra mile here and adds guest vocalists as well, including the simply sublime vocals from Juliana Barwick on the album standout and single Saccade. On this song, and pretty much over the entirety of the record, his typically emotive chords are here in full strength, again anchored by these percussive and crunchy electronic beats, as well as some hypnotic 4/4 kick drums. This is true relaxation music in every sense of the word, and at times it's also quite engaging still too. This is definitely the kind of album that will make me very excited for wherever Steve Hauschildt decides to go next. So for these reasons, it's my number 6 record of the year. My 5th favorite album of the year was Time by Louis Cole. This was a disarmingly intimate and vulnerable debut album from one of the funkiest dudes around, Louis Cole. His drumming on this record, and just in general, is unmatched, and his synth stylings are so tight, precise, and catchy that he transcends his status as just the bank account meme guy. He becomes a bona fide star talent on this record, making a bold turn and taking up the bulk of his record by showing us his softer side on the relationship slow jam After the Load Is Blown, the Dreamy Beach Boys inspired cut Things, and especially on Phone, on which Cole pens a thank you to a certain special lady friend of his that is always available whenever he's needing someone to call or a shoulder to lean on. The nice thing too is the slower songs are complemented very well by by the faster and more funky tracks that fans may know him for, like the squelchy opener to 3 a.m. debauchery Weird Part of the Night, and the uptempo banger Freaky Times, where Lewis has a strange urge to say the word fantasy as much as possible, it seems. Compound all these moments with the beautiful string arrangements across this record, and the often very relatable and humorous lyrics, and I think Time is a record that you can't help but not come away impressed with. My fourth favorite record of the year is Unknown Mortal Orchestra's Sex and Food, and much like the Porches album I just talked about, this album also grew on me quite a lot actually, and that's mainly due to its strong production and catchy vocal hooks. The bulk of this album is pretty much made up of mid-tempo psych rock tunes, which a lot of people and critics weren't so hot on necessarily, as I've seen people generally preferring the more Jimi Hendrix-style rock explosions of American Guilt or Major League Chemicals. But I love the subtle vocal harmonies and humorous dystopic lyrics of Ministry of Alienation, for instance. Those elements definitely make it a standout track for me, as well as the warm, woodsy acoustic cut This Doomsday, and the soft and sweet disco pop tune Honeybee. Sex and Food is definitely one of the albums I've revisited the most this year. It's certainly got a high replayability factor, and for all those reasons, it's my number 4 record of the year. At number 3, we have the 1975 with A Brief Inquiry into Online Relationships. This is another slick, inventive, creative record from the Manchester band. It's not only wildly ambitious, but the impressive tunes at the core of the record are amazing as well. You've got a ton of genre hopping here with several acoustic cuts. We've got some 90s arena rock throwbacks, we've got glittery dance hall, and some honest-to-goodness jazz pop. For me, the highest points on this record are the potent and soaring finale, I Always Wanna Die Sometimes, the charmingly beautiful bop of Sincerity is Scary, and the soulful R&B tune I Couldn't Be More in Love, of which the latter two are aided greatly by some gorgeous choral vocals. As I mentioned in my info dump video, which precedes this video, not every song on the record is a hit. One song I didn't talk about on that review that I didn't really like that much was the grating vocal melody and the repetitive trap beat of I Like America and America Likes Me. I like the message of it, I just don't think it's executed very well. Nor do I enjoy the misguided, mopey sex romp disguised as romance in Be My Mistake. But there are plenty of good and even great moments here. They're in no short supply. Basically, on A Brief Inquiry here, the 1975 were able to craft a more mature album than their previous records, in both lyrical and melodic aspects, and it shows. We've got my penultimate favorite album of the year, and that goes to Mr. Twin's sister for Salt. The 4-year wait from the Long Island band's last album, their self-titled, to the new one here, was very much well worth the wait. It's obvious here that Mr. Twin's Sister is just a band that's doing art pop like no other band around, and they're proudly waving their idiosyncratic flag on every track here. I enjoy the lyrics and the tune that is the skittering, jittery love letter to America as a melting pot that is Keep On Mixing. I also love the sultry, ambient reggae of the 8-minute outro Set Me Free, and the urgent disco groove of Jaipur rank among some of the best highlights on an album that are full of them. The atmospheres are always so well put together, they're so moody and spacious here, and the ever-evolving vocals from lead singer Andrea Estella wriggle and dance around each track like a snake. As I mentioned again in my review of this record, which I will link to the video down in the description box, the only real clunker of a track that I found on this record was Koh-i Noor, and honestly, 8 fantastic tracks out of 9 is still an outstanding feat, so that's why it's my number 2 record of the year. Now we're finally here, my number 1 favorite record of 2018. For those who have watched my review of this record, you hopefully have seen this coming, all 25 of you I think. That being the Parks Burton record, Pear. This album is such a stunning achievement for a number of reasons. It stuns me still that this is his debut album. A lot of debut records out there have the artist still finding their footing, or just trying to sculpt out a personality still, or just a unique sound that makes them them. Even one of the biggest and most successful bands in the world, Radiohead, have a notoriously lukewarm debut record in Pablo Honey, which to many fans is so bad and no longer indicative at all of the band's sound that they kind of semi-jokingly don't even include it when they're talking about ranking the band's records. However, that is so far from the case here on Pear. This is a confident culmination of everything Parks Burton has made up to this point, which includes his just as accomplished work as Vixor before he underwent a name change to Parks Burton a few years ago. Each song and really each individual sound is treated with the utmost care, and you can truly hear all the detail and all the time and all the effort that went into making even every individual note or melody or transition or vocal effect as good as it could possibly be. There are so many small details on this record that it's practically begging you to re-listen to it, and you pretty much have to listen back to it anyway, just because this album is so dense from front to back that it's so amazing that all these small details are still given so much room to breathe, and it never gets so packed that things are incomprehensible unless Parks Burton deems it so. He has such a control over all these sounds and all the moods and atmospheres on each song. It's incredible. And the emotional weight on songs like Patrice and Anyone are so tangible that it is stunning in how effective they are at portraying and conveying emotions in such a short time span, in like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Just the sheer amount of sonic ground that he can cover in these short run times is truly staggering. It's really no small feat. Songs like Ornament and The Valley are real roller coasters. You know, you can definitely feel like you've been taken on a journey, and by the time the song ends, like your hair's been blown back. You're just kind of sitting there stunned. This is an album that was definitely made by a perfectionist, and it shows. If you like your electronic pop music daring, dizzying, manic, and insanely detailed, a la an Igloo Ghost or a Clarence Clarity or even Bill Wirtz, you really owe it to yourself to check this record out, because for me, this is my album of the year. So thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys liked the list. If not, let me know down in the comments, or even if you did like the list, or if you thought, you know, some albums I mentioned should have been higher or lower, definitely let me know in the comments. If you have a record that was one of your favorites that you think I should listen to, let me know as well. I'm sure I missed quite a few, as obviously I only did my favorite 10 records of the year. But I'll be back hopefully in less than a week or so doing my top 50 favorite songs of 2018. So I'll see you guys then, and in the meantime, I hope you guys had a great and happy new year, and thank you again for watching The Information.